This video is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon! Here he comes. That's Kathy's clown.
Mom, how come you always say thank goodness instead of good night?
Because there's no reason to say goodnight. Now that Nickelodeon's got a nighttime lineup of new shows, old favorites, and all-around great TV entertainment. We call it Nick at Night.
This is the greatest experience that can happen to a man.
And what have we got?
Oh, just some of the crazy junk I was passionately fond of as a child. Such as what?
Such as Dennis the Menace, The Donna Reed Show, Route 66.
Please keep going.
Okay, there's the Nick at Night movie. A movie every weeknight, a different theme every week. Men in Tights Week, Rhythm in Wartime, a week of screwball comedies, and more. There's new shows, too, like Turkey Television, 42 Ways to Make You Laugh in an Hour, and the highly acclaimed National Geographic Explorer.
I can't get to sleep.
Who can sleep with great TV entertainment like this?
They'll sit up and giggle all night.
They sure will. Now that there's Nick at Night, all night, every night.
That sounds like a motto a man can really live by. I'll see you tonight. Bye.
Welcome to a brand new spin-off series, Nick Knacks at Night, a chronological look at the classic television shows that aired on Nick at Night. Beginning on July 1st, 1985, Nick at Night filled the hours from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night for the children's cable channel Nickelodeon, transitioning it to a 24-hour station by providing older, potentially nostalgic programming for the baby boomer parents that were buying the cable packages. Technically, Nick at Night is a separate channel from Nickelodeon, and as such hasn't fully factored into the larger Nick Knacks retrospective. But many of you wanted to see these older shows covered. Many of you grew up sneaking in some Nick at Night past your bedtime and discovering some old, weird, retro television for the first time. I mean, I certainly did. Nick at Night is where I first discovered shows like Get Smart, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and The Munsters. It is undeniably a part of the Nickelodeon experience, so heck, let's do Nick Knacks, but for Nick at Night. Before we get started, let's set some expectations. First off, Nick Knacks at Night will be updated less often than the main Nick Knacks series. My main focus is still going to be on the daytime programming. Nick Knacks at Night is a when I have spare time project. Second, there are shows that aired on both daytime Nickelodeon and Nick at Night, and when that happens, it gets a Nick Knacks episode. The main series gets priority, and I will not be double dipping. There isn't going to be a second Donna Reed Show video. Third, no, you can't request a Nick at Night show for Nick Knacks Sample Platter. Fourth, while I use a more loosey-goosey timeline for Nick Knacks, presenting shows chronologically by year but shuffling things up within that year for the sake of pacing, Nick Knacks at Night is going to be purely chronological. These shows presented in the order they first premiered on the channel. And with that in mind, there's only one place to start, because there was only one standard show in Nick at Night's starting lineup that didn't also air on daytime Nickelodeon. Dennis the Menace, National Geographic Explorer, and Turkey Television were all regular parts of Nickelodeon programming, and the Donna Reed Show, arguably Nick at Night's main event at the time, aired during the summer of 1986, along with My Three Sons and Mr. Ed, as a way to sample Nick at Night for cable packages that didn't yet provide it. So that just leaves us with one premiere show to kick this series off. This is Route 66.
The 60s. Crew cuts, convertible Corvettes, two guys looking for some answers. Route 66, Saturdays at 11:10 Central on Nick at Night.
Two handsome young men cross these vast United States in their Chevrolet Corvette convertible, always with the top down. Todd Stiles, played by Martin Milner, is a boyish romantic who's trying to find his fortune after the death of his father. His best friend, Buzz Murdoch, played by George Maharis, is a rough-and-tumble former juvenile delinquent, the kind of loyal, tough guy who'd take a bullet for you if he had to. Together, they make their way from state to state, settling down long enough to get a job in construction or farming or oil rigging or what have you, real blue-collar work most of the time. However, we wouldn't have a show if it was just about two guys picking grapes at a winery. Wherever Todd and Buzz end up, they always find themselves wrapped up in somebody else's problems.
Okay, Tommy, you can turn them two loose.
We'll stay.
Now, look, boy. Sparrow Falls takes care of its own. You drove her in, no more, no less. Now you drive yourself out.
An old prospector has just hit pay dirt, but now has some bad dudes trying to force him to sell, and they'll use violence if they have to. A blind woman is tracking down the man who killed her husband in a botched robbery. A bus full of models are in need of protection. Well, Todd and Buzz can't help themselves but get involved, especially when there's beautiful women involved. Todd favors girls closer to his own age, while Buzz seems to like his women a little more experienced.
Look, why don't we leave it like this? If you ever need a pep talk between halves or someone to break up a sugar cube in your coffee, anything at all, I'm your boy. I'm staying over at a place called the Martinique. Good night, Christina.
When trouble rears its ugly head, our heroes do what they can to set things right, see that justice is served and good, hard-working people aren't taken advantage of. But work always seems to dry up, and no place feels quite like home for these two. Just as quickly as they drive in, it's time for Todd and Buzz to pack up their bags and move on to the next town over to see what adventures await for them there. Originally airing on CBS for 4 seasons, a grand total of 116 episodes, between October 7th, 1960 and March 20th, 1964, Route 66 is a highly episodic show. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's an anthology show that just happens to have a couple of reoccurring characters. The importance Todd and Buzz have to the story varies wildly from episode to episode. Sometimes they're the focus, the main characters, like an episode where Buzz reflects on his past after picking up a hitchhiking orphan child.
Listen,
Buzz, it can't be that bad.
what do you know about orphan asylums? When's the last time you ever lived in one?
Look, it has to be done. Now, don't make it any tougher than it is.
Look, how'd you like to be locked up and for nothing?
Locked up.
Yeah, locked up. I mean, what do you call it?
But just as often, the two of them are the least important characters in the story, quietly observing in the background, almost Rosencrantz and Guildenstern style, only stepping in when a punch needs to be thrown. A woman is on the run because she believes her husband is trying to kill her, but nobody believes her because her husband is a famous jazz musician. Todd and Buzz offer themselves as bodyguards, but they're just elsewhere when the story reaches its climax.
It's been a long time since I rode a downwind course. Come on out with me, she'll be all right.
The episodes also vary greatly in tone. Much of the time, an episode of Route 66 is a serious thriller, edging towards desert noir, with amoral crooks, women of mystery, and a MacGuffin worth chasing after. A date farmer has buried treasure somewhere on his property, and a seductive dame gets with some local criminals to get the farmer to spill the beans.
You shouldn't have to lay a finger on him. Not for real. He's only got to think you would. No down payments. You gotta learn to move.
But just as often, the show aims for pure melodrama, people longing for each other and mourning those no longer there. A woman running a crop dusting company turns cold after the death of her husband, closing off the rest of the world in her grief, while the pilot under her employee thinks himself bad luck.
Wherever I am, whatever I do, whatever I touch, dies, rots, burns, decays, and I keep climbing a ladder, higher and higher, bone by bone and skull by skull. Christina, I told you I came here to beg. I'm begging you now. Get away from me, as far away from me as you can get.
And then occasionally, the show goes into full farce mode. Todd and Buzz going through a comedy of errors. A runaway girl tries to convince our duo that she's being chased by the mob, while some bumbling idiot detectives try to track her down.
Caxton, how long have you been with the agency?
2 years in Hong Kong, Mr. Bear, 3 months in Beverly Hills.
Bear operatives do not wear trench coats in the States, particularly not trench coats with turned-up collars. Well, stand by. We'll be on the track in a matter of minutes. They did teach you the agency motto, I presume?
Oh, nobody can hide from a bear.
A bear man.
Each story is self-contained, with only Todd and Buzz tying it all together. You can pretty much jump in at any point in the series and not be lost. And outside of a few cast changes, which we'll get into later, you can watch the show mostly in any order you'd like, which made it both very accessible to new viewers through its original run, and receptive to being shuffled up in syndicated reruns. It's so easy to just jump into a random episode of Route 66 and get a fun 51-minute adventure with little fuss. That's not to say there's no continuity. If you watch the show in order, you can map out the path Todd and Buzz's road trip takes them, and their route would make sense, bouncing back and forth between the east and west coasts. There's often little throwaway details connecting one episode to the next. In one episode, Todd is in Los Angeles taking a college course on computers. Then in the next episode, Todd goes,
"How'd you like to find out a computing machine is smarter than you? I just don't think this business course is for me. I think we should get back on the road."
Details not at all critical to the plot of the episode, but little threads that reward longtime viewers. Is this the perfect format for a television show? Maybe. It's very flexible, and flexibility is what you need when your production is traveling just as much as the characters in the show. Route 66 is filmed entirely on location, taking advantage of the genuine beauty found in North America. The show would ultimately film in 24 different states, plus a little dip in Canada to film around Toronto. That's a level of ambition you don't often see in narrative television, not even today. Route 66 was the brainchild of producer Herbert B. Leonard and head writer Sterling Silliphant. Leonard got his start as a production manager for Columbia Pictures before transitioning over to their new television division, Screen Gems. There, he initially found success in children's programming, shows like The Adventures of Rin Tin Tin and Circus Boy, the show that famously gave Mickey Dolenz, future drummer of the Monkees, his break in the show business. Deciding he wanted to give television for an older demographic a shot, Leonard's next project was the half-hour police procedural Naked City for ABC, an adaptation of the 1948 noir film of the same name. It was here that Leonard met Sterling Silliphant. Silliphant also dabbled in children's television, being a writer on the Mickey Mouse Club before going off to write episodes for serious dramas like M Squad, Perry Mason, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Naked City would be his first time as head writer for a series, writing a whopping 32 episodes of the show's initial 39-episode run. Naked City prided itself on its on-location shooting in New York City, so much so that the show's opening was just Herbert Leonard bragging about it in voiceover.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to see the Naked City. I'm Burt Leonard, the producer. As you see, we're flying over an island, a city, a particular city. And this is a story of a number of people, and a story also of the city itself. It was not photographed in the studio, quite the contrary. The actors played out their roles in the streets, aboard the Staten Island ferry, and in the harbor of New York.
Alas, Naked City really struggled. While it seemed to do okay critically, the ratings just weren't there, and one of its lead actors quit the show midway through the season, forcing the production to kill off his character and recast someone new. Kind of a mess, and so ABC informed Leonard and Silliphant midway through the show's production that it would not be returning for a second season. However, the two men had developed quite the creative partnership, and after some long discussions, decided to use the time they had left on Naked City to produce a backdoor pilot for a new show, something that emphasized the shot-on-location qualities of Naked City while bringing in some dynamic characters drawn from Herbert Leonard's own life. I started reminiscing about how when I was a poor kid on the New York streets, I would pal around with a very wealthy prep school guy. I began to wonder out loud what it would have been like for a couple of complete opposites like the two of us to go traveling around the country in his sports car. Then I said something like, "Sterling, that's our next show," and he jumped at it. Naked City, episode 31, 4th Street Corners, premiered on April 28, 1959. Two young soldiers are returning home. Johnny, played by George Maharis, tries to reconnect with his poor mother and sister, only to find the sister involved in a little shoplifting gang. In order to save her from the law, Johnny and his soldier buddy Lincoln, a blonde rich kid played by Robert Morris, team up to give the gang leaders a knuckle sandwich. The episode ends with Johnny telling his family he feels adrift, and he and Lincoln set out across America to try and find themselves. Leonard and Sullivan presented the episode and a pilot script to the heads of Screen Gems, but they just weren't interested. Part of that might have been the scope of the project, but part of that might have been that, honestly, that Naked City episode sucked. Over-dramatic, overacted, the character of Johnny is made wholly unlikable by his possessiveness of his sister.
What's with the lipstick?
You forgot our game.
I forgot nothing. What's with the lipstick? And shoes like that? What do you think you're made up for?
But yeah, Screen Gems didn't want to fund the pilot, so Leonard offered a different proposal. He would put up $350,000 of his own money to get the pilot episode made, and should Screen Gems decide to pick it up after that, Leonard would get 80% ownership of the show. Obviously, changes were made to the names and backstories of these characters, and the tone ended up being completely different, to the point where the Naked City episode could hardly be called a backdoor pilot after all. George Maharis stuck around, now in the character of Buzz, but Robert Morris didn't quite have the presence Leonard and Sullivan were looking for, and wasn't cast for the pilot. Tragically, the young Morris would die not soon after, on May 22, 1960, reportedly of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 25. Several people auditioned for the role of Todd, including a young Robert Redford, before the production settled on Martin Miller. The show was given the working title of The Searchers, but there was already a famous John Wayne movie of the same name, so they settled on Route 66, even though the final show would spend very little time on the actual historic United States highway of the same name. The pilot, titled Black November, sees Todd and Buzz wandering around an isolated island town in Mississippi, and being met with a cold reception. "You two ain't welcome here." It soon becomes clear that the town harbors a dark secret, and as the two young men poke around, they get closer and closer to danger. The episode maintains excellent tension. The town is uninviting with its winter-stripped trees and quiet streets, the shadows becoming oppressive as night sets in. And with the two boys trapped on the island, it's hard to see how they're going to escape from getting lynched. It's really unsettling in the best way. It turns out that the town's secret is that 15 years ago, during the final years of World War II, a young German soldier ran away from the Nazi army and tried to escape to the States. When discovered by the people of this town, who are mourning the loss of their own loved ones in the war, the young German boy is killed, along with a preacher who tried to defend him, and the evidence of the murders are hidden. It's a harrowing tale of the dangers of mob mentality and eye for an eye justice.
I swore, as long as I lived, I'd never touch an axe again.
You're holding one now, Paul. Chop the wolf tree down and let the sun in.
The pilot was received well, Screen Gems agreed to make the full series, and Route 66 was picked up by CBS. And then ABC went, "Oh, by the way, we decided not to cancel Naked City after all, and we want you to make it into an hour-long series. Okay, thanks, bye." Those guys just can't catch a break. Well, while Leonard and Sullivan were still technically involved with Naked City past its first season, it was better to focus on this hot new idea instead of the throwback, and both men spent 95% of their time on Route 66. Route 66 is a show very much of its time, and I mean that in the most positive way possible, embracing the political landscape it was made in. The pilot wasn't the only episode to feature the aftermath of World War II and the scattering of the Nazis. Season 1, Episode 4, The Man on the Monkey Board, sees Todd and Buzz crossing paths with an undercover Nazi hunter while working on an oil rig. A mystery that spirals into murder disguised as workplace accidents. And that means impressive stunts on a real-life oil rig. And then there were the rising tensions of the Cold War. Season 2, Episode 14, To Walk with the Serpent, deals with Buzz and Todd running into ultra-conservative extremists, an episode that pissed off the real-life, then-new, far-right John Birch Society, who tried to get the episode pulled and would have succeeded if Leonard hadn't made that gamble for ownership of the show. which included creative control.
We brought them here. We invited them here. We opened up our arms. Yes, we did. Read what it says in the Statue of Liberty. Give us your poor, your huddled masses. We said to them, to this human garbage, to this refuse from every other country on earth, we said unto them, come! And they came. This mongrel scum washed over the shores of America like a tidal wave of garbage.
It's really telling on themselves when the JBS looks at this and goes, hey, that's meant to be us. Season 1, Episode 11, A Fury-Slinging Flame, involves a small, scared community moving into a system of caves because they believe that nuclear Armageddon is on the horizon. The group led by an unrecognizably somber Leslie Nielsen.
You know, Alfred Tennyson once said that time is a maniac scattering dust, and life is a fury-slinging flame. I believe he could have been writing that about today.
And on that note, Route 66 proved to be a who's who of hard-working character actors from all over, packed with performers that make you go, oh, hey, it's that one guy or gal, you know, from that thing. It's Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction. It's the mom from Hazel. Hey, it's the alien guy from The Day the Earth Stood Still. Wow, it's Catwoman. I've never seen Walter Matthau this young. Hi, Ethel Waters. Hey there, Robert Duvall. Welcome, Ed Asner. Of course you'd be here, Peter Graves. Sorry that I always get you confused with Lee Marvin, who's also on the show. Hey, do you like 12 Angry Men? Because Route 66 has 7 of them. If you want to educate yourself on the mid-20th century acting scene, Route 66 is a great starting point. It was also one of those shows that had a space for the aging stars of old Hollywood. In one of the show's more goofy episodes, silent film star Buster Keaton shows up as the local jinx of a small fishing town. And, you know, he still got it, even in his late 60s. A few episodes later, horror icons Lon Chaney Jr., Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre show up as themselves, having a meetup at a hotel Todd and Buzz happen to be working at that week.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to serve you. Now, if you'll just relax a minute, Mr. Murdoch, my assistant, and I will go out and divert the chase. Oh, I suggest you get out of those outfits as soon as possible.
Again, the tone bounces around from episode to episode. As you can imagine, production of Route 66 was difficult. A mobile, on-location shoot that saw as much as 60 people, including the cast, writers, directors, and core crew, always on the move, with 5 vans moving equipment around. Because of this, oftentimes scripts would be written as the episode was being filmed. The challenge of directing Route 66 was adjusting to the environment you were working in. That varied week to week. Sometimes you'd get a complete script in advance, but it didn't always work out that way. On location, you'd have to adjust to your surroundings, make decisions, and be creative. In order to keep things running, the production would also supplement their crew with local theater productions, bringing them in as grips, background extras, that sort of thing. In November of 1960, production moved to El Paso, Texas, to shoot the show's 12th episode, Sheba, a story of a woman framed for theft by a corrupt cattleman. One of the locals to assist filming was an insurance and fertilizer salesman by the name of Harold P. Warren. Warren and Silliphant ended up striking up a rapport, and the legend goes that the two got to talking about horror movies. Warren bragged that making a horror movie has to be super easy, and the two men ended up making a bet on if Warren could make a horror movie all by himself. 6 years after the episode's production, Warren ended up making good on that bet, writing, directing, and starring in a little horror film called Manos, The Hands of Fate. Yes, without Route 66, Mystery Science Theater 3000 wouldn't have had its most famous episode.
You know, every frame of this movie looks like someone's last known photograph.
Route 66 wasn't the biggest show ever, but it did manage to crack the top 30 in Nielsen ratings and was very well received. Production of a second season began shortly after, and that's when things started to take a turn. George Maharis contracted a nasty hepatitis infection and had to be hospitalized. Buzz was temporarily written out of the show, the final 4 episodes of the season seeing Todd on his own, with the occasional one-sided phone call to tell the audience, don't worry, Buzz is still totally a part of the show.
Well, listen, the reason I called you is to tell you I'm going to stick around L.A. till you get over that virus of yours.
From outer space, that's where she came from. I talked to the doc today. He figures you've got a good 3 weeks on your back.
And indeed, Maharis was back to shoot season 3. But the intense workload of the traveling production, 12 to 16-hour days, 7 days a week, was too much of a strain on his weakened system, and the actor collapsed on set. Disgusted with how production was treating him, Maharis left the production for good, resulting in a very public feud between the actor and Herbert B. Leonard with Screen Gems. Those people just have no consideration for my health. They've got to learn show business has changed. There isn't any more old Hollywood where a company can buy movie stars like pieces of meat. After which, Route 66 switched back to being Todd only. And the show definitely loses something without the rapport between the 2 main leads. Todd was the more reasonable of the 2 to balance out Buzz's more childlike impulsiveness. Without Buzz, Todd is a bit stiff. He comes off as a bit of a spoilsport in his adventures. Todd-only Route 66 lasted for 10 more episodes. Season 3, episode 23, 15 Miles from Home, would introduce a new traveling companion in Link Case, played by Glenn Corbett. Link is a quiet, stoic man, a Vietnam veteran looking for a place for himself now that he's back from the war. That made Route 66 one of the first narrative shows to address the Vietnam War as a cultural moment in the United States.
Those banners on Pershing Street, welcome home Lincoln Case, they're for killing and hate. Mama died for love. You see the difference, Ma? Love.
To put it into context, this episode aired on March 22nd, 1963. The first major protest of the Vietnam War in the United States happened 6 months later, on September 21st. Simply having someone for Todd to bounce off of, both figuratively and literally, improved things greatly, and Link is a good character. Some of his scripts early on do feel a little was originally written for Buzz, with Link being a little more flirty and a little less stoic, but it evened out over time. However, this only fueled the fire between Maharis and Screen Gems. With his role effectively recast, Maharis assumed this meant he was out of his exclusivity contract, and started taking small guest appearances in other shows. But the producers disagreed, and lawyers started getting involved. Maharis ultimately won, getting out of his contract. A 4th season was produced, and while Link wasn't a bad character and Glenn Corbett wasn't a bad actor, the ratings dropped considerably without Buzz, and Route 66 came to an end for a total of 116 episodes, airing its last on March 20th, 1964. The 2-part finale saw Todd finally settling down and getting married, and Link deciding to return to the family he had been avoiding in Texas. It was a road trip to find themselves, and in the end, they found themselves. The series entered syndication shortly after and reran sporadically on local networks for the next 2 decades. Glenn Corbett would become a frequent guest star in television, finding memorable one-off roles in Star Trek, Bonanza, and The Rockford Files, before getting a lead role in the long-running medical soap opera The Doctors, and a reoccurring appearance on Dallas. Martin Milner would go on to star in the police procedural Adam 12, and in 1998 starred in the road trip documentary Route 66, Return to the Road with Martin Miller, which was really about the historical highway and was just using nostalgia for the TV show as a hook. George Maharis, the star who brought Route 66 to life and the man the show almost killed, he kept himself busy. He starred in a few movies, tried his hand as a crooner-style singer, starred in a short-lived crime drama, and was even the nude centerfold for the second ever issue of Playgirl. However, he never quite found that mainstream success again. After Route 66, producer Herbert B. Leonard took a stab at film directing before settling into a more quiet producing role. He would spend the late 80s and 90s trying to revive his old successes, including multiple reboots of Rin Tin Tin, and in 1993, a Route 66 sequel series.
Tuesday, Catch a Ride critics call a hard-driving, smoothly tuned winner.
Our work here is done. God, I always wanted to say that.
Route 66, Tuesday on NBC.
Starring James Wilder and Dan Cortez, Route 66 1993 involved Buzz's son and a wayward hitchhiker traveling the states in a C1 Corvette. The series flopped pretty hard, only airing 4 episodes before NBC pulled the plug. If anyone had a success story after Route 66, it was head writer Sterling Siliphant, who a few years later would win an Academy Award for his screenplay for a film you might have heard of called In the Heat of the Night. And he didn't stop there. He also defined the 70s disaster movie scene with the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno. He wrote the third Dirty Harry movie and the third Shaft movie. And he wrote his magnum opus, the Sylvester Stallone arm wrestling trucker movie, Over the Top. Route 66 had a very minor presence on VHS, but thankfully, the entire series was released on DVD, if maybe not in the best picture quality. At the time of this writing, you can watch all of Route 66 legally for free on streaming services like Tubi, Philo, and Amazon Prime, and the entire series is up on YouTube. As the decades have rolled on, Route 66's legacy has diminished somewhat. Successful in its time, but having kind of fallen to the wayside in mainstream consciousness the further we get from the 60s. And I think the reasons for those diminishing returns are the same reasons that make it an absolutely perfect pick for Nick at Nite's premiere lineup. Nick at Nite was an effort to attract the parents who actually paid for Nickelodeon. It wanted to attract them with nostalgia. In this case, baby boomers. And 9 times out of 10, it was nostalgia for the specific shows, not for what those shows represented. They aired the Donna Reed Show because their target audience would have watched the Donna Reed Show when they were young, not because the network thought the image of the domestic 50s housewife was worth being nostalgic over. It was the baby boomers who pushed back on that image, and Nick at Nite often poked fun at that image through Donna Reed's run on the channel. Route 66 was also a show baby boomers could be nostalgic for, especially the older baby boomers who watched because George Maharis was dreamy, and he's very dreamy. But it was also a show about the world baby boomers actually grew up in. Not a sanitized, advertiser-friendly version of American life, but a picturesque coast-to-coast tour. From deserts to forests, small towns to metropolises. And it was a love letter to the working class, an America full of farmers, factory workers, fishermen, oil drillers, coal miners, lumberjacks, secretaries, artists, students, sex workers, and rodeo clowns. It is a quality show full of adventure and suspense, and a documentary of a particular slice of this country at a particular moment in time, between a world war and a cold war, after the bomb but before the moon. Of course, I shouldn't oversell it. It's also very much a white perspective. While characters of color pop up from time to time, they are very rarely the focus of any given story. And contemporary events like the Civil Rights Movement aren't acknowledged in the text. And not because they didn't want to incorporate current events into their stories. Again, this was one of the first shows to bring up Vietnam. This is, to a fault, a white lens on America. But it is still much more of a document of its time than most television shows are, which on one hand means it holds little interest to younger audiences who might stumble upon it in reruns. But on the other hand, means it's a perfect vehicle for reflecting on the past, in a programming block on Nickelodeon about reflecting on the past. It's 2 hits of nostalgia for the price of 1. Route 66 aired on Nick at Nite for 2 years, between the block's premiere on July 1st, 1985, up to June 30th, 1987. Watching it for this video was the first time I had experienced the series, and I stepped away having found an almost new favorite. Its perspective shouldn't be taken as the totality of the American experience. and it really sucks how the show treated George Maharis, but it is nonetheless a very well-written anthology and a fascinating look at a time gone by. Route 66 turned out to be the perfect starting point for this look back at Looking Back.
When it's time to relax, there's only one place for better TV today. It's free, postmodern, wild and free. Watch Nick at Night for good TV.
Next time, Nick and Nite goes to the movies, and we go over the long history of licensing films for television. Today's research shout-out goes to the 2006 book, Route 66, the television series by James Rosen. While the book is mostly just an episode guide, not exactly relevant in these internet days, the first 40 pages are dedicated to behind-the-scenes quotes from cast and crew, which really helped bring the scope of the show to light for me. Making TV is hard. So while I've got you, let's talk some shop. Over on Patreon, I set up the goal that, once we reached $1,000 per video, I would begin Nick Knacks at Night. And we reached that goal at the beginning of 2024. However, 2024 has been an absolute nightmare of a year for me. A year of evictions, cars breaking down, homelessness, all that good stuff, so I'm only just now getting to it. However, in November, Patreon switched from a per video to per month subscription plan, and in the process, I lost about a third of my revenue, dipping well below the initial Nick Knacks at Night goal. So here's what's going to happen. We held the goal for most of the year, so I'm going to respect that and release the first 6 episodes of Nick Knacks at Night no matter what, which if you're curious are Route 66, the Nick at Night movie, I Spy, the Smothers Brothers show, the Ann Southern show / Private Secretary, I'm going to do those 2 shows together, and Mad Movies with the LA Connection. If we get the Patreon up to $2,500 a month, I'll stretch goal in 3 more episodes. Car 54, Where Are You?, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and Make Room for Daddy. If we get it to $3,000 a month, well, we're back to where we used to be, and Nick Knacks at Night will continue full-time. If you're already a patron, double check to see what tier Patreon automatically placed you in. A lot of people got defaulted to $1 a month. If that's where you want to be, awesome, but be sure that's correct. You can also support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, leaving a comment, sending a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee, following me on Blue Sky, and sharing Nick Knacks at Night with all your friends. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, Black Lives Matter, trans rights are human rights, and free Palestine.